Hello, witch world. Your dear friend, Uncle Birch, here with another rant. The universe teaches me what to teach. Things come to me wherever I'm at, reminding me of a lesson. Everything is about witchcraft that I think about. Everything I think about its relation to witchcraft. And even on my days off, messages can come through the air on a lesson that I need to teach. And this one's come up so much that I figure I just need to do a video about it so I can stop repeating myself and not stop saying what I thought was a no-brainer, what I thought was obvious, but nothing's obvious. First of all, a long time ago in a land pretty close to where I'm at now, I was sitting around discussing with a fellow teacher, teaching techniques, craft stuff, sitting around talking shop. And this teacher told me, I'm sorry, I'm like tearing off a hangnail or something. Anyway, this teacher told me that in their system they saw no need to study the wheel of the year, the pagan calendar for the 8 sacred holidays of the year. Our calendar, what it's all about. They said they saw no reason to study this in an intro or a Wicca 101 course because it's so obvious that everybody should just know it. There was nothing to be said about Wheel of the Year. I found that odd because I found nothing more controversial and changing and malleable than the Wheel of the Year, depending on who you're talking to or depending on what tradition they come from. We're using a standard pagan holiday or pagan calendar marking the movements of the sun. That's 4 holidays, equinoxes and solstices. And then the sun's effect on the earth, what it does to the plants, what it does to the animals on the earth, their reaction to what the sun just did. Now, sun does the same thing everywhere, but its interpretation and what it means to people is different because some people's harvest time or some people's planting time is another people's hunting time, depending on where their ancestors came from. So there's so much difference to the Wheel of the Year. And I found, working with a lot of people, that there's certain little holes, problems that I see along the way. Now, no one has the only true one and only right way. But there are some ways that seem to get changed over time for no valid reason, something forgotten, I guess. Now, I run into this concept in this place where people don't study the Wheel of the Year, that around Samhain, some people, some witches, believe that God is dead and that God's gone until winter solstice. And we are just running around Earth without God at all. Even though we had a bunch of gods not that long ago, now we got none. We got no gods until solstice. Now, that's not a wheel. That's a wheel with a hole in it. And I remember early on learning about the circle, and then having the circle inundated over and over and over about everything that the circle means. Circle is a cycle that never ends. An end point is the beginning of another point. The circle speaks about our lives, our reincarnation cycles, planet. It's the circle. And the circle is everything in the craft, and it repeats itself over and over and over again. And if our lives are a circle, and if we say that upon death we enter a new path, the end of one thing is immediately the beginning of another thing, why not for God? Why not for God? Because somebody didn't want to study the Wheel of the Year, and then somebody got confused, and then somebody ran out with their confusion and repeated it over and over and over and over again until you've got a huge mass confusion. Now, it'd be very depressing to be on Earth without God. And there's nothing in it, in all paganism, to make that happen, with the exception of this. There may be, perhaps, a day and a half, maybe close to 3 days in the pagan calendar where God was ever seen to be dead. And that was right around the winter solstice. If you have not seen Zeitgeist, the movie, you need to stop now. Go back to YouTube, search Zeitgeist. I'll try and throw the spelling up on there. You need to see this movie. And what was hard to understand will be hard not to understand once you see the movie. So in that model, there may be a time, a brief period, where God is in a waiting state to be reborn right before the winter solstice, because the sun ceases to move for about 3 days and rises again at the winter solstice. That's about it. Other than that, there's no reason to ever believe God dead. It was really clear when I was a kid, and so I want to make it clear to you. God continually dies and is never dead. Is that hard? God continually dies. He rises to his peak, dies for his people, and then becomes something else immediately upon death. Okay, we go somewhere around winter solstice, God's born. Somewhere around spring equinox, he starts looking for that spring goddess. Around Beltane, God gets laid. Around Lammas, God gets married, if it happens at all, and that's in the Celtic. Lu marries Eru, the sun marries the earth at Lammas. As God moves around, he reaches his peak at the summer solstice, and the peak of God is the king for a day scenario. God rises to his absolute majesty and then falls. That's the death. First death we'll see on the wheel of the year. Now, although here maybe this is part of the confusion, not a whole lot is spoken of this, and nobody comes out and says, hey, the sun god just became this other god. But all of a sudden, sun god dies, and then there's these other gods immediately on the scene that seemed to not be there just a moment ago. John Barleycorn, Jacks of the Greens, foliage gods, gods of plant matter, suddenly on the scene as soon as the sun god dies. That's what God does. He dies and becomes something else. Now, right around the last harvest, John Barleycorn's finally hacked down for the last time, and he is in fact dead, becomes bread. Becomes bread every time he gets hacked down. But when he finally dies, suddenly there's this Lord of Death, and he wasn't there before. Maybe that's the problem, is nobody's talking about this becomes that. But this God is suddenly removed from the picture, and then immediately we have another God form on the scene, running around doing his thing. This is how God transforms himself, is rising, dying, rising, dying, rising, dying. And then all the versions of God all over the world have that in it. The Christians, all of them, have that as their mythos for God. God always has that kind of cycle. That's why Jesus had to die on the cross, so he could be like the gods of old. So God dies and immediately has become something else. He has immediately taken on his new life. So around the last harvest, the harvest god, or the grain gods die. They get harvested, and then all of a sudden, the Lord of Death is reigning in his spot, and we never talked about him before we even got to Samhain. Just all of a sudden, he's there. And then, at some point, he's not there anymore, and there's this newborn god around solstice. And so, maybe they needed to emphasize harder in the old tales the one becoming the other, but I think looking at it, I think therein lies the mistake. I think just somebody's missing that little part of the picture, and they knew that God died, and they came from a religion where maybe they sit around and mourn and whine about the death, and they forgot that we don't do that. They forgot that we celebrate these things, that we don't mourn the dead, we don't whine about their passing, we celebrate their new life. We celebrate for our ancestors around Samhain. And we are not celibate. That too is another religious path. So God's a circle. Just remember the circle. If you don't have the circle, you don't have God. How's it going?